While any art is bound to be subjective, and video games are no exception, there are generally trends where, for example, the majority agree a game is good or bad, the critical and commercial success, or lack thereof, align, or by and large, the critics and players were mostly in agreement in their assessment of a game's quality. This list is not about those times. This list is about the times where critics went and decided that a video game really did belong in the trash heap, then a bunch of players went, fished it out, said, nope, you're wrong, this is treasure, then had a grand old time with it. Jules ran you through a list on this very topic around a year ago, but it became clear we'd only hit the tip of the deeply unappreciated video game gem iceberg, so we got you some more entries. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 8 more video games critics hated, but players loved. Number 8, Kirby Air Ride. Coming in at a not awful rating of 61 from the critics on Metacritic, this one certainly wasn't massively panned, but as any fan of Kirby Air Ride will tell you, it deserved better because this game is sick. The good sick, not the bad sick. I was gonna say it's the but I can't say that word, even though I've now said it, but it was probably bleeped. Anyway, let's talk about the pink ball. Users were far kinder to the game on Metacritic, evening out at an 8.1, and elsewhere rained love on the Cutie Pie Racer, leaving it with a 96% approval on Google and 5 stars on eBay. I know that's a weird place to get user reviews, but the game came out on GameCube in the early 2000s, no one was really keeping track of these things. Fortunately, it's not hard to find out just how beloved Kirby Air Ride is en masse. Players praised Kirby mastermind and game director Masahiro Sakurai for the pitch-perfect mechanics, design choices, and modes that provide a surprising amount of variety and replayability. In particular, the city trial mode where up to 4 players could zoom around a city that featured a bunch of different biomes, seeking power-ups, vehicles, and all kinds of different secrets was a massive fan favorite. While many Western critics claimed Kirby Air Ride was overly simplistic, both in its control scheme and lack of direction in telling players what to do, it turns out plenty of people didn't need firm objectives or complex systems. Many were just stoked to jump into races with friends, check out the different settings, and get a kick out of the racing mechanics and level design. Whether you played this as a kid or an adult, players were just happy messing around and basking in the sheer joy of it all. Curiously, that's exactly the same reasoning for a game I'm mentioning later on in this list, except in that game, there's less flying around on a cute little star and more pissing in your own face. Yeah. Number 7, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of the Sky. In what will be a painful reminder for fans of this one who remain flabbergasted that so many critics just didn't enjoy it as much as a huge number of players, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of the Sky came in like a wrecking ball on Metacritic with a user score of 9.1. And what did it get from the critics? A measly 54%. Yeah. Somebody's got some splaining to do. The 2009 Dungeon Crawler scored a 4.9 out of 10 from IGN, with reviewer Jack DeVries decrying the game for, quote, lazy and dated gameplay, as well as featuring unimpressive visuals, going so far as to call it a ripoff due to the game rehousing the content from the 2 previous games as Pokemon tends to do. And this fell in line with most of the other critics. Players, on the other hand, absolutely adored Explorers of the Sky, highlighting its challenging but fair gameplay loop, gripping plot, stunning soundtrack, memorable characters, and enormously compelling story. The game is now firmly cemented as a cult classic due to its dedicated fanbase. Number 6, Mad Max. Given it came out the same year as Mad Max Fury Road, you'd be forgiven for assuming the 2015 action-adventure from Avalanche Studios would be a cash-in, not worth your time. Some of the critics who contributed to the game's not-so-nice 69 average on Metacritic might agree with you, but the players who bumped it to a 79 on their side, not to mention a 9 out of 10 on Steam, and similarly favorable review scores on PlayStation and Xbox, clearly thought differently. While critics panned the game for its uninteresting story, repetitive environments, quest design, redundant mechanics, and average on-foot combat when compared to what it offers in the vehicular combat realm, players were having a hell of a time. I mean that in the nice way. You get it. Praised for being an underrated hidden gem, players lauded the expansive world, thrilling vehicular combat, engaging atmosphere, fully realized setting, and interesting characters you meet along the protagonist's journey through the main story. Number 5, Postal II. Postal. Is that enough? I feel like saying Postal is probably enough in a list like this to explain in one singular word why it is that players looking for some general rat-baggy fun might have a better time in a game like this than those who have to critique the medium for a living, but let's talk about it anyway. That's not to say critics don't value general rat-baggery fun, but Postal, with its peeing on people, unaliving innocents, and sticking a cat on the end of your gun to use as a silencer, is inevitably a divisive little offering. While the first Postal game scored a 56 from critics on Metacritic and a 6.8 from users, which is fairly similar, Postal 2 dipped its critic score down to 50, but players were like, oh yeah, they got it right this time, landing it on an 8.1. This is backed up by a 10 out of 10 Steam rating and pretty glowing player feedback across the board. Players loved the game for its dark humor, weapon variety, wild degree of freedom, and raw rampaging fun. Conversely, many critics just didn't see the joy in the mayhem, calling it everything from offensive and crude to fundamentally technically busted with uninspiring mechanics. Ultimately, Postal 2 was probably the game all of us would have made when we were 10, and the fact that running with scissors put it on shelves makes it not at all surprising the game proved to be a hit. Also, some people call it Florida Simulator, and that's just funny. Number 4, Godand. Coming in at a ripe 95% thumbs up from Google users, a 9.2 on Metacritic from users, and a slightly different 3 out of 10 from IGN, who called the game, and I quote, boring, frustrating, and annoying. This one absolutely fits the bill for the list, so let's go Godand. Clover Studios' 2006 beat-em-up for PS2 was published by Capcom and directed by Shinji Mikami. Yes, that's Shinji Mikami, the one who also directed Resident Evil, Resi 4, Dino Crisis, and The Evil Within. An icon of the games industry, Godand was expected to do great things. And it did, just not if you ask the critics. Tapping into the B-movie game genre, which is certainly a trend on this list, critics liked the brawling action combat, but many criticized the graphics, level design, unwieldy camera, lack of polish, and like most of the other things that made it up. It's worth adding this one does have a Metacritic score at 7.3 from journos, which is nothing to sneeze at, but when you look at the individual scores, they're all over the shop, suggesting this one was just something you totally got and were really into, or you just trashed it immediately. Not your thing. Those who got it, though, really got it, and cementing the reality that journos reviews are just one person's take, while IGN gave the game a 3 out of 10, they also popped the cult classic on their list of the 100 best PS2 games. Players well and truly adored Godand, especially its humor, nuanced combat, unique personality, music, story, and most of the other things that made it up. Number 3, Nioh. Now a household name for JRPG fans, synonymous with the best games that have been made in the genre, Nioh got off to a really rough start. It wasn't always glowing praise, exciting replayability, and phenomenal remasters for Yoko Taro's Drakengard spin-off. When the game first hit shelves back in 2010, it's safe to say critics didn't really get it. And to be fair, the game struggled to make waves commercially too, with Yoko later saying that while sales figures weren't bad, they left a lot to be desired. Critics slammed the game for its graphics, which looked like they belonged to a game from many years prior, as well as its bland environments, uninteresting side missions, basic combat, and yeah, again, pretty much everything. They did praise the voice acting and soundtrack though, which if you've listened to any music from this game or its sequel, makes a lot of sense. While critics were far from convinced, players were somewhere between cautiously optimistic and spellbound by the game's unique storytelling, atmosphere, and potential. While it scraped a 67 from the critics on Metacritic, it was awarded a healthy 8.5 from users. That's long before its stunning remaster landed. Explaining that the game is so much more than the sum of its parts, players praised the stunning and complex narrative, fascinating characters, oodles of charm, and enchanting experience for those willing to dig a little deeper. While said players admitted the combat mechanics and visuals weren't anything to write home about, they said that anyone writing the game off for these factors is sorely missing out. As for the excellent remaster and stellar sequel that would come out later, it turns out that the naysayers were absolutely wrong about Nioh. Number 2, Deadly Premonition. Deadly Premonition is one of the most infamous divisive video games or pieces of art in general of all time. If you could look up the phrase, those who get it, and those who don't in the dictionary, and you did see a picture of protagonist Francis York Morgan's stoic mug, you wouldn't be surprised. The 2010 survival horror hit so many notes that just aren't for everybody, and has a fair basket of technical misses, resulting in it being a clear middle-of-the-road title for professional critics en masse. Those who loved it outweighed those who didn't, and the rest thought it was just okay, landing the game with a 68 Metacritic score, but that 8.2 user score tells a very different story. While critics may have been assigned this one when it just wasn't their speed, it's clear that players decided to jump on board with a better idea that they get a kick out of it, especially after word of the absurdity of the Twin Peaks-inspired B-movie vibes got out. Delightfully strange, and so much so it's not always easy to tell whether or not the developers were in on the joke. Deadly Premonition is a game that's so hard to categorize even into a single genre, but that's probably half of the appeal. On release, IGN US hit it with a 2 out of 10 and Destructoid with a 10 out of 10, describing the game with pretty much every adjective in the book, between praise for its humor and characterization to outlets agonizing over its awful controls. Comparatively, a lot of players adored it, happy to overlook the bugginess and oddities that missed the mark in order to appreciate the unique experience and all of its moving parts that easily endear themselves to you if you give them a chance. In short, many players say the charm is off the charts if you're up for a deeply strange but rewarding horror excursion. Both this game and the last one in this list fall into similar categories. Call them B-movie games, cult classics, or games that are just so bad they're good. All we know is a hell of a lot of you guys and us got a kick out of them. Number 1. Earth Defense Force 4.1 The Shadow of New Despair. Now, Earth Defense Force games don't have the biggest gulf between critic scores and user scores on Metacritic, although there is certainly a gulf for every one of their games. But you guys in the comments section of our last video had so much to say about how you understood that this game was a hot mess, but it was your hot mess that you loved. It was too endearing for me not to put it at number 1. Almost all of the Earth Defense Force games critically hovered close to a 69 score, while the user assessments came in between 7.5 and 8.2, if we're just sticking to Metacritic. On Steam and PlayStation, it becomes clear that players bloody love the Japanese sci-fi third-person shooter series. While not every entry is a winner, even for fans, Earth Defense Force 4.1 The Shadow of New Despair was particularly adored, rating a 4.63 out of 5 on PlayStation, just beneath that on Xbox, and coming in at a podium finish on Steam with a 10 out of 10 from just under 7,000 reviews. While critics sledge the cheesy dialogue, rampant bugs, and rudimentary gameplay, even going as far as to say the game isn't so bad it's good, it's just so bad that it's bad, players wholeheartedly disagreed. The series has an enormously loyal fanbase who know they're in for a campy, buggy time, but that it's all part of the fun and the humor and joy of co-op more than make up for it. Said players included those of you who popped into our comments section saying the game is awesome and just like Starship Troopers and has exactly the right notes of satire and B-movie vibes. Just to get super confusing with it, Earth Defense Force 4.1 The Shadow of New Despair is a 2016 remaster of Earth Defense Force 2025, which came out in 2013. There was also a reboot called Earth Defense Force 5, which came out in 2017, so if you aren't in the know, just take it that there's a lot of names for games which are extraordinarily similar. No matter the entry though, the critical skepticism and then absolute fan adoration and cult obsession with these games is pretty consistent the whole way through the series.